Good morning and welcome back to the 120th. This is a Fuji GSW690 Mark III. You've seen me with a Fuji GW690 Mark III before on the channel and I quite enjoyed that, but I do love wide lenses and this one is the super wide version with a 65mm f5.6 lens. So I should love this camera, but will I? Alright, Fuji GSW690 Mark III. Let's start with a bit of background. Fuji GW690 and GSW690, the first ones launched in 1978, GW690 Mark II and GSW 1985, and then this one, the Mark III, came out in 1992. Along the way there were also 670s, 680s, all in GW and GSW. All the GWs throughout the entire range have a 90mm f3.5 lens. All the GSWs throughout the entire range have the 65mm f5.6 lens. The only actual difference between the GSW 670, 680 and 690 Mark II, Mark III was the size of the negative, the film gate and the size of the negative. This one is the big daddy of them all, the 690, shooting massive 6x9 negatives, and of course you're only going to get 8 of those per roll of 120 film. This is a 6-element Biogon lens. If you look at the lens diagram for this, it's really weird actually. The two central elements are just huge, big, fat, thick things. So Fuji obviously put a lot of work into that lens, and the lenses stayed the same from the Mark I all the way through to the Mark III, and as I said, all the way through the range, 670, 680, 690. The lenses were the defining thing about this series. They are fixed and you can't change them. So this lens is what it is. This camera will never have a different lens. Now, I've never questioned that about them. For me, they just are what they are. They're a fixed lens rangefinder. But then recently, Fuji brought out the GX100 RF, and I saw an advert for it, and despite the fact I don't spend much money on digital cameras anymore, I looked at it and thought, who is going to want that? Who is going to spend $5,000 on a fixed lens camera? That doesn't matter how big the sensor is. Why would you spend $5,000 on a fixed lens camera? And then it occurred to me as I was doing this, that's exactly what this is. That's exactly what Fuji did back in the 70s and 80s. They created this camera which gave you monster negatives with a fixed, unchangeable, super high quality lens. And they obviously sold really well. You can still find loads of these about on eBay. They're relatively easy to get hold of. And that probably tells you two things. Number one is that they're probably decent quality, that they're still working even after all these years. But number two, that they're probably pretty popular when they were being sold originally in the 80s. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the initial stock around to still be available. Now, you have seen me out on the channel with a Fuji GW690 Mark III before. You can find that video here. And I sold that pretty shortly after doing that video, and I missed it afterwards, and I've been thinking about getting another one. Then I was coming out here to Toronto and I thought, let's do it, let's get another one. So I went looking for a GW690 and I started finding GSW690s. And I was thinking, I love wide lenses. If I'm shooting on 35mm, I would always choose a 28mm over a 50mm. Not that I shoot much 35mm anymore. So I saw the GSW and I thought, let's give it a go. Let's try it out. The 65mm lens shooting on 6x9 negatives gives you a massive 70-degree field of view. So it is wide. I am looking forward to seeing what this can do. Let's go and give it a go. Right, then we are in Centennial Park in Mississauga. It is a very bright spring day, which is going to pose its own problems. I do not have any filters for this camera. Here it is. So I have no NDs, I have no polarizers, which would definitely be useful on a day like today. But that's all right, we're gonna have a little wander around, see what we see. Hopefully try and get some sort of landscapey shots with some foreground. That's the idea here. So I'm going to do one just across here now. Reeds in the foreground and frozen lake behind. So we'll start with that. 15th of a second. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. The whole world here in Toronto is at that kind of grubby point in between deep winter and spring, where they've had a few warm days, a couple more cold nights. Everything melts and then freezes and then melts and then freezes. So the whole world is covered with this rock hard ice, which tends to stand a little bit proud of the actual ground, because the ground's warmed up and melted the ice underneath it. So you go around walking on this rock hard ice that when you stand on it briefly, you go pinging through it. Need to be a bit careful where I'm shooting. Obviously there is a lens kind of hood, built-in lens hood. As you can see, it's not shadowing from the sun, so we might be getting some lens flare here. Also, I can't tell if there's lens flare because this is not an SLR, so I'm not looking through the lens. Right then, I've left Centennial Park behind me. I'm now back down on Etobicoke Creek Trail. It's beautiful down here. There's loads of wildlife here. I've been down here taking photos of birds, and I've had coyotes trot past me and all sorts down here. There are also beavers in the stream, and they have these black grey squirrels. See that guy on the tree there? There he goes. It's quite unusual. It's quite fast flowing down here. Let's wander down that way. It's really fast flowing today actually. I mean, they've obviously had a lot of melt. This is a great example of the damage that beavers do to the trees. So I'm going to get a quick shot of that. Right, that's a roll done. I forgot how fast you get through rolls with this camera. It's obviously shooting 6:9, so you're getting 8 frames to a roll of 120. And obviously 8 frames goes pretty quick. I think I'm going to put some black and white in next, because why not? So I've got some FP4 with me, so let's chuck that in. Going to turn off down this path and see what's down here, and hopefully find a bit of shade where I can put a new roll in. All right, found a bit of shade. Look at this though, look how fast this river is running. It's not normally like that. That's all the snow melt that's happening upstream. So I'd imagine all the beavers are going to be holed up in their dens. What's called a beaver's den? I don't know. So I don't think a beaver could swim against that current. Could it? Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Anyway, I've got a bit of shade. So I'm going to change my roll here, put in a roll of FP4. Tell you what though, how about this? That is an ambitious beaver. Twice as thick as a beaver. Let's see what we can see out here. I totally haven't got the equipment with me to take any photos of beavers, even if I do see one. But it's nice to spot them anyway, isn't it? Okay, so 2 things to talk about straight away. Number 1, 0 functional issues. This camera worked perfectly every time for both rolls. I did also put a roll through it before I started videoing just to make sure it was actually functioning. Absolutely no issues, even out in the cold. It's been great. The second thing we should talk about is that lens. I think the word for it is immaculate. And that's not necessarily the highest praise that it sounds like. It's super wide, but it is so clean. There is no bowing, there is no fisheye, there's no vignetting, there's no fall off on the corners. We're getting edge to edge sharpness across an enormous negative. It's pretty impressive, I have to be honest. There is a story online, repeated in a few places, that these cameras found a lot of their use being used by professional, kind of semi-professional photographers in Japan, taking photos of groups of tourists. So they would hang around where the tour buses stopped and offer to take photos of tourist groups, and then obviously do them prints and sell them for however much it is. And I think that's a good use for this. That is exactly the situation where you would want a perfectly flat, immaculate image at that kind of distance with that kind of width to get a full tour group in the shot. But I'm struggling a little bit to think of another use for it. And that's where my brain is at the moment. There is no doubt that this is a cracking camera. It's an amazing camera with an amazing lens and all those qualities that you would test for if you were reviewing it for a magazine. It would score 10 out of 10 for. But what am I going to use it for? That's the question in my mind. Where does it fit into my armory of cameras? I feel like for a landscape camera, I almost want a bit more character. I want a few more flaws. I want a bit of bowing. I want just a fraction of fisheyeing maybe. Otherwise we're into that kind of slightly complicated world of just immaculate reproduction of a scene. I felt like some of my shots there were a bit too clean. They could have just done with a bit of something about them. But, I say all that, and then we also complain about the imperfection of other cameras. So there's no pleasing some people, and apparently there's no pleasing me. Having said that, there's one thing that I just cannot escape about this camera. I have got 4 cameras out here with me in Canada, and right now, this is the only one working perfectly. This is the only one that I 100% trust. And that's kind of big. That's a big thing. My ETRS is playing up, my 6006 is playing up, my Iconta 520 I've just repaired and haven't had a chance to test yet. So right now, this is the only camera I've got with me that is working. And it seems to be working 100% of the time. And that is a pretty big feather in its cap. And it is because of this reliability that I'm going to be shooting with this camera again tomorrow. I am going out shooting with the wonderful Ishkan Ghazarian, a Toronto resident who also has a YouTube channel. And he and I are going to do some videos together. We're going to be shooting some street, and we are then going to be going into a studio with a model. And I am going to do the whole thing on this. I'm a bit nervous about that. I'm not so worried about the street. I think this will be fine for some street photography. In fact, I think it'd probably be great for some street photography. It's the studio bit that I am slightly concerned about. The crazy wide lens plus the minimum focus distance of 1 meter means you can't fill the negative with anything apart from like a huge wall. So I'm going into the studio with a model, and if this is my negative, the biggest I'm going to be able to get this model in the frame is like that big. And that really limits what I'm able to do with it. Also, as you saw in those photos, there is precious little control over depth of field. Essentially, it's almost impossible to get a short depth of field with this camera. That last shot you saw is basically as good as it gets with this. That is wide open at 5.6, focused on the tree at 1 meter away. That's a minimum focus distance. And you can see the depth of field you're getting there. You are getting a bit of a short depth of field, but that's as good as it gets. That's as blurry as you can blur the backgrounds. So it's not a problem. I wouldn't go into a studio thinking to shoot on a massively short depth of field. It wouldn't be my first choice of thing to do. But the options are limited. But it doesn't matter, I don't have a choice. This is the only camera I've got that's currently working, so I will be doing that, and that will be the next video out on this channel. This Fuji GSW 690 though, there's no doubt, it's a cracking camera. It's really good. I am just not sure what I'm going to do with it. Is it a snapshot camera? Do I take it on holiday with me? There's no doubt it would do an amazing job of being that holiday companion, but you're shooting 6x9 negatives, which means you're only going to get 8 shots to a roll, and you're going to chomp through the rolls. Do you really need that kind of quality from your holiday snaps? Why not take a 645 and get 16 shots to a roll? So listen, this is a great camera. There is no question about that. Super reliable, super well built. The lens is spectacular. It's a feat of lens design without question. I just don't know what I'm going to do with it. I don't know what I use it for. Maybe I will know more after this studio shoot. I'm curious to see what I can achieve in a studio with this camera and the limitations that it brings to me. That will be the next video coming out on the channel. Ish and I are both going to be shooting Portra 400 because it's super cheap out here for some reason. I will be taking this camera, which is a Texas Leica. Ish will be shooting on his Leica. So Leica versus Texas Leica head to head. Should be a fun video. Watch out for that. That's coming next on the channel. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.